"We're rich, Mom. $1,000,000 for that dusty old land." "My son," Mark was beaming, sliding the developer's contract across my dining room table. His wife, Chloe, shrieked with glee, already tapping on her phone, no doubt looking at new cars. I just let them have their moment before I slid a single sheet of paper back towards them. "You're right, the diner has been sold," I said calmly. "But you don't get a penny. I sold it 2 weeks ago, for $1. The color drained from Mark's face. Chloe stopped tapping. "To who?" he stammered, his voice cracking. To understand the look of pure shock on his face and the decision that led to it, you have to understand the 40 years of sacrifice he was so eager to erase. To understand the look of pure shock on his face and the decision that led to it, you have to understand the 40 years of sacrifice he was so eager to erase. That diner wasn't just a piece of land. It was a testament. It was my life. Later that night, long after Mark and Chloe had left in a huff, the silence in my small house felt deafening. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't read. I walked to the old oak bookshelf in the living room, the one my late husband Arthur built with his own 2 hands, and ran my fingers along the spines of the books until they found it. A thick, leather-bound ledger, its corners worn smooth from decades of use. It wasn't just a book of numbers. It was our diary. I sat in Arthur's favorite armchair, the fabric faded to a soft gray, and opened the cover. Tucked inside was the first picture we ever took of the place. It was just a shell back then, a boarded-up shoe store on Main Street that everyone else said was a lost cause. But Arthur and I, barely 25 and running on coffee and pure grit, saw something else. In the faded black and white photo, we stood under a hand-painted sign that read, "Coming soon, the morning glory." We were so young, so thin, and so ridiculously happy. The memories flooded back, not in a gentle wave, but like a tidal surge. I could almost smell the fresh paint and sawdust, feel the ache in my back from laying down the checkerboard tile floor ourselves, square by painstaking square. I remembered us, after a 16-hour day of sanding and wiring, sharing a single cold bottle of Coke on the front stoop, watching the cars roll by and dreaming. Arthur, with a smudge of white paint on his cheek, turned to me and said, "Eleanor, this place is going to be more than a restaurant. It's going to be a landmark, a place where people feel at home." He was right. For 40 years, the Morning Glory was the heartbeat of our little town. We opened at 5 a.m., for the farmers and factory workers, their hands calloused and their appetites honest. We knew who took their coffee black and who needed 3 sugars. We watched the high school football team celebrate their victories in our booths, carving their initials into the worn oak tables we never had the heart to refinish. We saw first dates turn into wedding anniversaries, all celebrated over a slice of my famous apple pie. Arthur was the heart of the place, with his booming laugh and a pancake flip that was pure theater. I was the head. I managed the books, ordered the supplies, and made sure every dollar we earned was stretched until it screamed. We weren't just flipping burgers. We were building a life, a real American life, from the ground up. I turned a page in the ledger. There, in my neat, careful cursive, was an entry from 1997. Hired our first employee today, Maria Sanchez. A good kid. Hard worker. I smiled. Maria had stayed with us for 10 years before she left to start her own family. Then came the memories of Mark. I flipped forward a few more pages. I remembered him as a little boy, sitting in booth 4 with his coloring books while I did the payroll. He never seemed to see the magic. To him, the diner was just the place that smelled like fried onions and kept his parents busy. I remembered one Saturday, he must have been 10, sitting right there at the counter playing his Game Boy. Arthur tried to show him how to work the milkshake machine. "One day, son, this'll all be yours," he'd said, his voice full of pride. Mark didn't even look up from his screen. He just shrugged. "It's old," was all he said. That one word, old, it was a small thing, but it was the first crack in the foundation. To him, the history didn't matter. The sweat, the sacrifice, the community we'd built. It was just old. As he got older, it became a source of embarrassment. His friends' fathers were bankers and lawyers. His dad was a short-order cook. He never understood that Arthur was more of an entrepreneur than any of them. He never saw the dignity in serving your neighbors, in knowing their stories, in creating a space that felt like a second home. I closed the ledger, the soft thud of the cover echoing in the quiet room. That diner had paid for Mark's braces. It had paid for his college education, the business degree he was now using to try and convince me to sell it for parts. It had paid for the down payment on the ridiculously oversized house he and Chloe lived in, the one with the granite countertops and the 3-car garage. The morning glory had given him everything. And in return, he and his wife saw it as nothing more than an outdated asset to be liquidated, a greasy spoon, as Chloe had once called it under her breath, not realizing I could hear. They saw a Zillow listing. I saw 40 years of my life. They saw $1 million payday. I saw Arthur's ghost, still smiling behind the counter. They saw a burden. I saw a promise I had made to my husband on his deathbed, his hand frail in mine, his voice a whisper. Don't let them tear it down, Elle. It's our legacy. And as I sat there in the dark, clutching that old ledger to my chest, I knew this wasn't just about money. It was about honor. It was about respect. It was about a legacy my son couldn't see, and a promise I would die before I broke. The fight wasn't coming. It was already here. The fight wasn't coming. It was already here. And it arrived, as I should have expected, not with a polite phone call but with a full-blown ambush the following Saturday morning. I was in my kitchen, sipping my first cup of coffee and enjoying the quiet hum of the refrigerator, when a car I didn't recognize, a sleek, black SUV that looked like it belonged in a rap video, pulled into my driveway. Mark and Chloe got out, but they weren't alone. Trailing behind them was a young man in a suit that was too tight in the shoulders, clutching a laptop like it was a holy relic. They didn't even use their key. They rang the doorbell, a formal, jarring sound in the quiet of my morning. I opened the door, and Mark breezed past me with a cheerful, "Morning, Mom. Hope we're not interrupting." Chloe followed, giving me an air kiss that smelled of expensive perfume and entitlement. "Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "This is Brad. He's a top investment advisor, and he was kind enough to squeeze us in." Brad gave me a handshake that was all bone and no warmth. Before I could even offer them a seat, he had his laptop open on my coffee table, pushing aside the very ledger I had been holding just last night. The casual, thoughtless shove of that book, my life's work, sent a hot spike of anger through my chest. I said nothing. I just walked back to the kitchen and poured myself another cup of coffee, my hand steady. When I returned, they had a full presentation glowing on the screen. Charts, graphs, and a lot of words I knew were designed to sound impressive and mean nothing at all. "Mom, you have to see this," Mark began, his voice taking on the smooth, practiced tone of a salesman. He clicked a button, and a flashy logo appeared. "PupStart. This is it. My app. It's the Uber for dog walking. We're talking geofencing, optimized route mapping, premium treat add-ons. It's a game changer." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "I see. It's more than a game changer. It's a gold mine," he continued, leaning forward, his eyes shining with a desperate kind of light I recognized. It was the same look gamblers get right before they lose the farm. But tech startups need capital. Serious capital. Brad here has run the numbers. The diner. Mom, it's not just a building. It's an asset. A severely under-leveraged asset. Brad cleared his throat. "Based on current commercial real estate valuations and projected zone development," he recited, never making eye contact, "the parcel of land the Morning Glory occupies is a prime target for acquisition. We could leverage that value into a significant line of credit for PupStart." I looked from the slick presentation to the worn armchair where Arthur used to sit. Leverage. What a cold, empty word for a place filled with so many warm memories. "So, you want me to take out a mortgage on the diner?" I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "To fund your dog-walking app." "Not a mortgage, Mom. It's an investment," Mark insisted. "You'd be a silent partner. Imagine, no more getting up at 4 a.m., no more dealing with greasy bacon. You'll be a tech investor. We'll all be rich within 5 years, I promise." That's when Chloe decided to chime in, placing a perfectly manicured hand on my arm. "Think about the branding, Eleanor. The Morning Glory. It's so dated. But PupStart, it's fresh. It's the future. It's so much cleaner than all this." She waved her hand vaguely around my living room, at the photos of my family, at the handmade quilt on the sofa. "And you won't have to smell like fried onions all the time." The condescension in her voice was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. I carefully placed my coffee mug down on the coaster. The small, deliberate clink was the only sound in the room. It was the only protest I allowed myself. Fried onions. That was the smell of the honest living that paid for the clothes on her back. I looked at my son, my only child. He wasn't a bad person, not deep down. He was weak. He was a man who had been given everything and had mistaken that for earning it. He saw his father's hard work not as a legacy to honor but as a resource to be plundered. He wanted the reward without the struggle, the success without the sacrifice. He was chasing a digital ghost, a get-rich-quick fantasy, and he was willing to burn down his family's history to fuel the fire. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, watching them. I saw the impatience in Chloe's eyes, the nervous twitch in Mark's jaw. They thought their slick presentation and business jargon had me cornered. They thought the old woman who still used a flip phone couldn't possibly understand the complexities of leveraging assets. They had no idea I'd spent 40 years balancing books, negotiating with suppliers, and staring down bankers. They saw a frail, sentimental old lady. They didn't see the strategist. Finally, I folded my hands in my lap. "It's a lot to think about," I said, my voice soft. "You'll have to give me some time." Mark's face fell, a flash of frustration crossing his features before he masked it with a smile. "Of course, Mom. Take your time. Just don't take too long. The digital world moves fast." They packed up their laptop and their empty promises and were gone as quickly as they had arrived, leaving the scent of Chloe's perfume lingering in the air like a chemical spill. I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the ledger they had so carelessly pushed aside. I held its familiar weight in my hands and knew, with absolute certainty, what I had to do. They wanted to leverage my legacy. Fine, I'd leverage it first. But a plan like that needs patience. It needs a calm exterior while the gears are turning underneath. The next few weeks were a performance. I smiled, I served my regulars, and I told Mark I was still thinking whenever he called, which was often. The perfect stage for my performance came, as it always does in our town, on the 4th of July. Our neighbor, Carol, throws a huge backyard barbecue every year. It's a real slice of Americana, the kind of party you see in commercials. Kids doing cannonballs into the pool, the smell of charcoal and freshly cut grass hanging in the humid air, and enough potato salad to feed a small army. It was a tradition. For 30 years, I'd brought the dessert. My cherry pie was famous on our block. Arthur used to say it was my secret weapon. This year, the pie felt different in my hands as I walked over. It felt heavier. It was the same recipe I'd used 100 times, the lard and butter crust so flaky it shattered at the touch of a fork, the filling tart and sweet from cherries I'd pitted myself. But as I carried it across the lawn, past the tiki torches and the red, white, and blue bunting, it felt less like a gift and more like a shield. Mark and Chloe were already there, of course. They thrived in these settings. Chloe, in a white sundress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, was holding court by the inflatable pool swan, a glass of rosé in her hand. Mark was manning the grill, looking every bit the suburban king, flipping burgers with a confidence he'd never actually earned. He gave me a wave. "Hey, Mom, you brought the pie. You're a lifesaver." I smiled my practiced smile and set the pie down on the crowded picnic table next to a mountain of coleslaw. For an hour, things felt almost normal. I chatted with Carol about her rose bushes. I caught up with Mr. Henderson from down the street about his hip replacement. These were my people, the ones who had watched Mark grow up, the ones who had brought casseroles to the house for a week straight after Arthur passed. Here, I wasn't an under-leveraged asset. I was Eleanor. I was handing a slice of pie to Carol's grandson when the wind shifted, carrying a snatch of conversation from the group by the pool. It was Chloe's voice, bright and sharp and used to being the center of attention. "Honestly, the tech world is brutal," she was saying to a few of the younger couples. "Mark's got this billion-dollar idea, but we're just completely bootstrapped right now." Someone asked, "What about the diner?" I thought that place must be a gold mine. I froze, my hand hovering over the pie server. The sounds of the party, the splashing water, the sizzle of the grill, Bruce Springsteen on the radio all seemed to fade into a dull hum. Chloe let out a little, tinkling laugh. It was a sound I had come to despise. "Oh, the diner," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Please." We're just waiting for the right moment to sell. A developer is putting in a megaplex right on that corner. Can you imagine? We'll finally get out of this town. Mark and I belong in the city. I could feel Carol's grandson staring at me, waiting for his pie, but I couldn't move. My blood ran cold. Then another voice, one of the neighborhood women, asked the question that hung in the air. But what about Eleanor? She loves that place. And then came the words that changed everything. Eleanor, Chloe said, her voice dropping into a confidential, pitying tone. Oh, she's thrilled. She's ready to retire. We've already found her a lovely facility. Facility. Not a condo. Not an apartment. A facility. The word hung in the air. Clinical and cold. It was a place you put things you were done with. An object. A problem. I saw Mark standing just a few feet away, by the drink cooler. He heard it. I saw the flicker of something shame, maybe, cross his face. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second across the yard. He saw that I had heard. And what did he do? My son, my only child, he looked away. He turned, grabbed another beer from the ice, and walked in the other direction, as if he were suddenly fascinated by a patch of brown grass near the fence. He said nothing. His silence was his consent. In that moment, standing under the bright July sun, surrounded by my friends and the life I had built, I had never felt more invisible. They weren't just planning to take my diner. They were planning to erase me, to pack me up and put me away in a lovely facility while they cashed in my life's work and moved to the city. I don't remember handing the boy his pie. I don't remember saying my goodbyes. I just remember walking back across my lawn, the grass prickly under my sandals. The half-eaten pie sat on the table, a symbol of a community they wanted no part of. They didn't just want to sell the diner. They wanted to sell the life that came with it. My life. Back in the quiet of my house, I walked to the window and watched them, laughing, socializing. My son and his wife, celebrating their future, a future built on my ashes. The slow burn of resentment I'd been feeling for years finally ignited into a cold, clear flame of rage. The performance was over. My mind was made up. There would be no more thinking about it. There would be no more second chances. The strategist wasn't just awake, she was going to war. I didn't slam the door when I got back inside. I didn't throw anything. The rage that had flared up in me at the barbecue had already cooled, hardening into something far more dangerous. Resolve. The distant sounds of laughter and music from Carol's yard were nothing more than white noise. I walked through my quiet house, past the photos of my son, past the memories of my husband, and went straight to the small roll-top desk in the corner of the living room. This was my space. Arthur had the counter and the grill. I had the books. I didn't reach for the old leather-bound ledger, the one filled with stories. That was for sentiment. This was for battle. I pulled out a set of keys from the top drawer and unlocked the bottom file cabinet. Inside, neat and orderly, were a dozen identical spiral-bound accounting books, one for every year since Arthur had passed. These weren't filled with anecdotes or faded photos. They were filled with cold, hard facts. Black ink for profits, red ink for losses, supplier costs, payroll taxes, profit margins calculated down to the last penny. This was the part of the business Mark had never bothered to understand, the part Chloe would have found dreadfully boring. This was the engine. I spread the last 5 years of ledgers across my dining room table, the same table where Mark had pitched his ridiculous app. I turned on the old green banker's lamp, and its focused pool of light illuminated the crisp, neat columns of my handwriting. I sharpened a No. 2 pencil not with an electric sharpener, but with the small, silver manual one Arthur had given me years ago. The whisper of the wood shaving off was a satisfying, familiar sound. It was the sound of getting down to business. For hours, I worked. I didn't just look at the numbers. I interrogated them. I ran my finger down rows of figures, feeling the slight indentations of the ballpoint pen on the page. I pulled out my old 10-key calculator, the heavy kind with the big, satisfying buttons, and the tape started spitting out streams of calculations. The rhythmic click-clack whir was like a metronome for my thoughts. Mark saw a failing, greasy spoon. The numbers told a different story. Yes, profits were modest. We weren't a franchise. We didn't have a drive-through. But we also had zero debt. The building was owned outright. The equipment was old, but maintained and fully paid for. Our suppliers were loyal, and I paid them on time, every time, earning us the best prices. We had a steady, reliable customer base that was the envy of every new cafe that tried to open on Main Street and failed within a year. We weren't a gold mine, but we were a rock. Solid, dependable, profitable. But the real asset, the one that never showed up on a balance sheet, was the goodwill. It was the 40 years of trust we had built with the community. It was the landmark status Arthur had dreamed of. A developer didn't just want the land. They wanted our location, our history, the very soul of our corner of town, and they were willing to pay a premium to bulldoze it. As I stared at a projection I had made, a simple line graph showing our steady, humble profits over the last decade, the idea began to form. It wasn't an explosion of insight, but a quiet, logical conclusion. Mark and Chloe saw the diner as a lump of cash. They wanted to liquidate the past to fund their imaginary future. But what if the diner's future wasn't a pile of money? What if its future was an extension of its past? What if the legacy wasn't something to be sold, but something to be invested in? My eyes landed on an entry from 3 years ago, catered the high school vocational program's fundraising breakfast. No charge. I remembered that day. A dozen kids from the at-risk program, clumsy and shy in the kitchen, learning how to crack an egg with one hand, their eyes wide with concentration. They weren't just learning to cook, they were learning they could do something. That they had value. The plan clicked into place, sharp and clear and perfect. It was a plan that would honor Arthur. It was a plan that would protect the diner. And it was a plan that would leave Mark and Chloe with absolutely nothing. My hand moved to the Rolodex on my desk, another ancient piece of technology Mark had laughed at. I spun the knob, the cards flicking past plumbers, electricians, produce suppliers until I found the one I was looking for. Sanchez, Maria. Her home number. My first employee. The hard-working kid who now had kids of her own and ran the catering for the local school district. I picked up the heavy receiver of my landline phone, the cord coiling around my finger. I dialed the number, my heart beating a steady, determined rhythm. It rang 3 times before she picked up. Hello. Her voice was warm, familiar. Hello, Maria. It's Eleanor. There was a pause, then a delighted gasp. Eleanor! My goodness! How are you? It's been so long. I'm very well, thank you, I said, my voice even and calm. Listen, I know it's late, but I'm calling for a reason. I have a business proposal for you. It's about the Morning Glory. That phone call to Maria was the first domino. The rest of the pieces began to fall into place with a quiet, satisfying precision. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I met with a lawyer, not some slick downtown attorney, but old Mr. Abernathy, who had handled our diner's incorporation papers back in 1985 and had eaten breakfast at our counter every Tuesday since. We met after hours, in the quiet of his dusty office, the only light coming from his desk lamp glinting off the framed photos of his grandchildren. I laid out the ledgers. I explained my plan. He didn't see a sentimental old woman. He listened. He nodded, and a slow, appreciative smile spread across his face. Eleanor, he said, tapping a pen on my profit and loss statement. This is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. He handled the paperwork for the LLC, the nonprofit charter, the deed transfer. Every document was another brick in the fortress I was building around Arthur's legacy. All the while, I kept up the facade. I answered Mark's increasingly agitated calls with a vague, I'm still weighing my options, dear. I could hear Chloe in the background, her voice a sharp whisper, just tell him to sign it. They were getting desperate. I knew they would. Desperate people make mistakes. They get loud. They get clumsy. And their final clumsy mistake came, predictably, at the worst possible time for them and the best possible time for me. It was a Sunday morning, just after 11, the post-church rush. The diner was humming with that specific, controlled chaos I loved. The air was thick with the smell of brewing coffee, sizzling bacon, and maple syrup. Every booth was full. The counter was lined with regulars. I was behind the register, making change for the Miller family, when the bell above the door didn't just jingle, it crashed open. Mark stormed in like a thunderstorm breaking on a sunny day. He wasn't the slick tech bro from my living room. His hair was a mess, his shirt was untucked, and his eyes had the wild, panicked look of an animal caught in a trap. He strode right through the line of waiting customers, ignoring their annoyed glances, and planted his hands on the counter in front of me. "Mom," he said, his voice a low, urgent hiss. "We need to talk, now." I finished counting out Mr. Miller's change. "Good morning to you too, Mark. As you can see, I'm a little busy." "I don't care," he snapped, his voice rising. A few people at the counter turned to look. The developer's offer, the big one, it expires in 24 hours. They need a signature. Today. I calmly took the next customer's order. "2 coffees to go?" "You got it, Bill." I turned to the coffee machine, my back to my son. I could feel his impatience radiating off him like heat. "Are you listening to me?" he demanded, stepping closer. "My funding. The angel investor for Pupstart," he pulled out. "This is it. This is the only way. We need this deal, Mom. You have to sign." He was practically shouting now. The entire diner had gone quiet. The clatter of forks stopped. The low murmur of conversation died. Every eye in the place was on us, on him. My son, the successful businessman with the fancy degree, coming into his mother's workplace and throwing a temper tantrum like a toddler. I could feel the flush of humiliation rise up my neck, but I pushed it down, replacing it with an icy calm. This was his stage. I was going to let him perform. I finished pouring the coffees, snapped the lids on, and slid them across the counter to Bill, who looked deeply uncomfortable. "Here you go," I said, my voice steady. Then, and only then, did I turn to face my son. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I leaned forward slightly, my gaze holding his. "We are not discussing my finances in the middle of Sunday brunch in front of the whole town, Mark," I said, each word low and sharp as a shard of glass. The fury in his eyes was met with a wall of pure, unshakable stone. He had expected me to crumble, to be embarrassed into submission. He had miscalculated. I stood up straight, wiping my hands on my apron. "This conversation is over, for now." "But Mom, go home." I cut him off, my voice leaving no room for argument. "We will talk tonight, at my house, 7 o'clock, and you will bring Chloe." He stood there for a moment, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. He had lost control of the narrative, and he knew it. He looked around at the faces of our neighbors, our customers, staring at him not with sympathy, but with a quiet, potent judgment. He had shown them exactly who he was. Defeated, he turned and stalked out of the diner, the door slamming shut behind him. The bell gave a final, angry jingle. A moment of stunned silence hung in the air, and then, slowly, the sounds of the diner started up again. The clinking of silverware, the murmur of conversation. Bill, my customer, just shook his head and pushed a $20 bill across the counter. "Keep the change, Eleanor," he said quietly. I nodded my thanks, my hands perfectly steady as I put the money in the register. I looked out the big plate glass window and watched Mark's sleek black car peel out of the parking lot. He thought he was coming to my house tonight for a final negotiation. He thought he was going to win. He had no idea he was walking into the checkmate I had been carefully setting up for weeks. The slow burn was over. Tonight was the explosion. The hours between closing the diner and 7 o'clock passed in a state of strange tranquility. There was no panic, no last-minute doubt. I went home, showered, and changed into a simple but well-pressed pair of slacks and a cream-colored silk blouse. I didn't feel like a victim preparing for an attack. I felt like a general preparing for a final decisive battle on home turf. I made a pot of chamomile tea, its gentle scent filling the small house, a stark contrast to the storm that was about to break. I set out 3 cups on the coffee table my own, and 2 for Mark and Chloe, a small, deliberate act of hospitality that I knew was the last I would ever offer them. Next to the cups, I placed a single, thin manila folder. It contained just 3 sheets of paper. It looked insignificant, almost pathetic, next to the space I left for the thick, intimidating contract they would surely bring. At precisely 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Not the frantic, impatient ring of a desperate man, but a single, confident chime. They had regrouped. They had their strategy. I took a deep breath, walked to the door, and opened it. Mark stood on the porch, his hair combed, his shirt tucked in. He had managed to produce a look of strained apology. Chloe stood beside him, a vision in beige, clutching a leather portfolio. and behind them, lurking like a shadow, was the man in the tight suit from their first ambush, the investment advisor. He was now clearly a developer's agent, a hired gun to close the deal. "Mom," Mark began, his voice soft, "I am so sorry about my behavior today. It was out of line. I was just stressed." "I see," I said, stepping back to let them in. My voice was neutral, revealing nothing. They settled onto my sofa, a united front of predatory ambition. Chloe immediately took the lead, her voice oozing a sympathy that was more insulting than Mark's anger. "Eleanor, we know this is a lot to process, but we are all here to help you make the right decision. For everyone." The agent, whose name I didn't bother to ask for, opened his briefcase with a series of sharp clicks. He laid a document on my coffee table that was at least an inch thick, bound in a heavy blue cover. It landed with a solid, definitive thud right next to my simple manila folder. "This is it, Mom," Mark said, his feigned apology forgotten, replaced by the raw excitement of a kid on Christmas morning. "The final offer. It's even better than we thought." They came up. $1.2 million. All cash. The agent here says it closes in 30 days. You'll never have to fry another egg again. He beamed at me, as if he were handing me the keys to the kingdom. Chloe leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. From her portfolio, she produced a glossy, trifold brochure and spread it out on the table. The picture on the front was of a sterile, modern building, surrounded by unnaturally green lawns. The name, in a swirling, gentle font, read, "Silver Willows Senior Living." "And look," she said, her voice bright and cheerful, "I found the perfect place for you. It's more of a resort than a home, really. They have water aerobics and a library, and oh, you'll love this. It even has a craft room. You could take up knitting." There it was, the facility. My entire life's work, my home, my future, all neatly packaged and disposed of so I could be shuttled off to a resort with a craft room. The sheer, breathtaking condescension of it almost made me laugh. They didn't see me. They saw a problem to be solved, an asset to be liquidated, and an old woman to be put out to pasture. I just sat there, in Arthur's armchair, and let their words wash over me. I watched them, a strange sense of detachment settling over me. I saw my son, a man so blinded by his own desires he couldn't see the woman who raised him. I saw my daughter-in-law, a woman whose entire sense of self-worth was tied to the things she could buy. And I saw the agent, a man who saw my home, my legacy, as nothing more than a parcel of land and a commission check. The agent slid the thick contract across the table. It nudged my thin folder, pushing it aside. He uncapped a heavy, expensive-looking fountain pen and placed it deliberately on top of the signature page. "It's a standard acquisition agreement," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "You can have your lawyer look it over, of course, but the 24-hour deadline stands. This is the best and final offer." They all looked at me, the three of them, a tribunal of greed, waiting for the inevitable surrender. The air in the room was thick with their expectation. This was the moment, the culmination of their pressure, their manipulation, their disrespect. Mark leaned forward, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Just sign it, Mom. It's time to let go. It's time to start our future." I looked at the pen. I looked at the contract. I looked at my son's eager, hungry face. And finally, slowly, I reached forward. Not for his pen. Not for his contract. I reached for my own small, insignificant folder. It was time. I reached for my own small, insignificant folder. The flimsy manila paper felt powerful in my hands, a stark contrast to the heavy blue-bound contract that was supposed to decide my fate. I didn't open it right away. I let the moment stretch, letting the silence in the room grow heavy with their anticipation. Mark was practically vibrating with excitement. Chloe had a smug, satisfied little smile playing on her lips. They thought this was my surrender, my final weary acceptance of their grand plan. Finally, I looked up, meeting my son's eyes. My voice, when I spoke, was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a razor. "You're right, Mark," I said. "You're absolutely right. It's time to let go. The morning glory has been sold." The explosion of relief in the room was palpable. Mark let out a whoop of laughter, slumping back against the sofa cushions. "Yes, oh thank God, I knew you'd see reason, Mom." Chloe clapped her hands together, a sharp, delighted sound. "Oh, Eleanor, that's wonderful. You made the right choice." Her eyes were already distant, no doubt furnishing a new condo in the city. "When do we get the money?" The agent said 30 days. "Right." I let her question hang in the air for a beat. I watched the pure, unadulterated greed on their faces, and I felt nothing but a profound, chilling pity. Then, I slid the single sheet of paper out of my folder and pushed it gently across the coffee table. It was a copy of a deed transfer. "Oh, you don't get anything," I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "I sold the diner 2 weeks ago." I paused, letting the words land. "For $1. The smiles vanished from their faces as if they'd been wiped clean. The agent, who had been looking at his phone, snapped his head up. Mark just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, the joy draining from his eyes to be replaced by a vast, uncomprehending confusion. Chloe was the first to find her voice, a high-pitched, incredulous squeak. $1? What are you talking about? That's insane. Is this a joke? I have never been more serious in my life, I replied, folding my hands in my lap. Mark finally shook his head, as if trying to clear water from his ears. "To who?" he stammered. "Who did you sell my inheritance to for $1? "First of all, Mark, it was never your inheritance. It was my business," I corrected him gently. "And I didn't sell it to a person. I sold it to an idea. An idea that actually honors your father's memory, instead of bulldozing it." I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering. 2 weeks ago, my lawyer finalized the paperwork creating the Morning Glory Legacy Project. It's a registered 501(c)(3) nonprofit LLC. The diner, the land, and all its assets were transferred to that entity for the symbolic price of $1, ensuring it could never be sold to a developer. I let that sink in before delivering the final beautiful detail. Its new executive director is Maria Sanchez. You might not remember her, but she was our very first employee. And starting next month, she's turning the diner into the Legacy Kitchen, a tuition-free culinary arts and job training program for at-risk youth in our community. The very kids we used to give free breakfast to before school. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the quiet tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that had measured out the years of my life in this house. In that moment, the power in the room had shifted so completely it was almost a physical force. I was no longer the frail old woman being managed. I was the architect of their ruin. Chloe's face was a mask of disbelief, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the ugly twist of fury in her features. The agent was slowly, discreetly packing his briefcase, his professional veneer shattered, wanting nothing more than to escape the blast radius. But Mark just stared at me. And in his eyes I saw the final, dawning horror of a man who has been outplayed in a game he didn't even know he was losing. He saw his app, his funding, his escape from this town, his entire fantasy future, dissolving into smoke right before his eyes. He had come here for a coronation. Instead, he was witnessing an execution. The first sound to break the spell was a strangled gasp from Chloe. But it was Mark who finally erupted. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. The carefully constructed facade of the concerned son, the slick entrepreneur, shattered into 1,000,000 pieces, revealing the furious, entitled child beneath. "You gave it away!" he roared, his voice cracking with disbelief and rage. His hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. "My inheritance! That was my money! Our future! You just gave it to a bunch of charity cases." He started pacing in the small space between the sofa and the television, a caged animal. "I'll sue you! I swear to God, I'll sue you! We'll get a judge to see you're incompetent. You're senile! You can't just give away $1,000,000 asset. That's not legal." Chloe, finding her voice, joined the chorus. "He's right, Eleanor, you've lost your mind. We were going to take care of you, and this is how you repay us." I just sat there, in Arthur's armchair, and let the storm of their words break over me. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I had spent years absorbing their casual cruelties, their thoughtless insults, their suffocating expectations. Their rage was nothing compared to the quiet weight of their disrespect. I let him vent, let him exhaust himself on his own fury. The agent, seeing a lawsuit brewing and his commission evaporating, was now stuffing papers into his briefcase with the frantic, silent energy of a man escaping a burning building. He didn't even bother with a goodbye. He just scurried out the door, closing it softly behind him, leaving the three of us alone in the wreckage. When Mark finally paused, breathing heavily, his face flushed and blotchy, I looked at him. My gaze was steady. "That's the first piece of news," I said, my voice cutting through his ragged breathing. He stopped pacing and stared at me, confused. The first piece? What are you talking about? What could possibly be worse than this?" I let my eyes drift around the living room. I looked at the fireplace where we'd hung Mark's stocking every Christmas for 38 years. I looked at the faint pencil marks on the doorframe, measuring his height from a little boy to a man who now towered over me. I looked at the sofa they were sitting on, the very one they had planned to replace. "The second piece of news," I said, bringing my gaze back to meet theirs, "is about this house, the one you've been measuring for new furniture. The one you thought you'd be moving into after you put me in my lovely facility." Chloe's hand flew to her mouth. Mark's face, already pale with anger, went completely ashen. I reached into my little manila folder one last time and pulled out the final sheet of paper. It was a copy of a real estate contract. "I sold it," I said simply, 2 days ago, for full market value. I had 3 offers within 6 hours of listing. I let them absorb that before I delivered the final, precise cut. "The new owner is Carol, from next door, the neighbor whose barbecue you were at last month. I gave her a good deal. She was so pleased to hear that the house would be going to someone who appreciated the neighborhood." I paused. "The new owners close on Friday. Today is Sunday. That means you have 5 days to remove any of your personal belongings you've stored in the attic. After that, they'll be disposed of." I folded my hands back in my lap. "I'm afraid you'll all have to leave." The sound Chloe made was a small, wounded whimper. This was a blow she understood on a visceral level. Not a business, not a nonprofit, but a house. Her dream house. Gone. Mark didn't shout this time. He just sank back onto the sofa as if his legs had given out. The fight was gone. The rage was gone. All that was left was a hollow, echoing defeat. He looked around the room not as a future owner, but as a trespasser. He was seeing it all for the last time. The place where he took his first steps. The place he came home to from college. The place he had taken for granted his entire life, assuming it would always be there, waiting for him. And I felt a pang, not of triumph, but of a deep, aching sadness. This house wasn't just wood and nails to me either. It was the place I brought my son home from the hospital. It was the place Arthur and I had grown old together. Every corner held a ghost, a memory. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that you cannot build a new future in a house haunted by a toxic past. To save the legacy, I had to give up the diner. And to save myself, I had to let go of the house. It was a clean break, a painful, necessary amputation. Chloe was the one who broke the silence. It wasn't a shout or an accusation, just a quiet, hopeless sob into her hands. The sound was thin and pathetic in the heavy quiet of the room. Mark stared at her, then back at me, his face a hollow mask of disbelief. The fury had been burned out of him, leaving behind nothing but the cold ash of defeat. He tried one last time, his voice barely a whisper, a final, desperate attempt to find a foothold in the landslide that had just buried him. "Mom," he said, and the single word was filled with a lifetime of accusation. "How could you? After everything I've done for you, keeping an eye on you, helping with the yard." His words trailed off, empty and ridiculous even to his own ears. I looked at my son, this stranger sitting on my sofa, trying to cash in a handful of mowed lawns for $1 million legacy, and the last of my pity for him evaporated. I stood up from Arthur's armchair. The movement was slow, deliberate. I wasn't just standing up to him, I was standing up for myself, for Arthur, for every 4 a.m., wake up, and every 18-hour day. "Everything you've done for me," I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Let's talk about that. Your father and I worked our fingers to the bone for 40 years. We poured our youth, our sweat, and every dime we ever made into a place that mattered. We built something that was a cornerstone of this town. A place that fed people, that employed people, that gave people a place to feel welcome." I took a step towards them, not in anger, but with the force of a truth that had been held back for far too long. "You looked at that same place, and you didn't see 40 years of sacrifice. You didn't see a community. You didn't even see a business. You saw a lottery ticket you hadn't bought but felt entitled to win. You saw a shortcut to a life you never bothered to earn. I pointed a trembling finger at the glossy Silver Willows brochure still lying on the coffee table. You saw a facility for me and a payday for you. Don't you dare talk to me about what you've done for me. You haven't been keeping an eye on me. Mark, you've been watching the clock, waiting for me to die. He flinched as if I had struck him. Chloe sobbed harder. I have loved you every day of your life, Mark. But love isn't a blank check. It isn't a permission slip to be greedy and disrespectful. And a legacy. A legacy isn't something that just falls into your lap because of your last name. I walked to the fireplace and rested my hand on the cool oak of the mantel, where a picture of Arthur and me on our wedding day still stood. You don't inherit a legacy, Mark, I said, my voice softening with a deep, profound sadness. You have to be worthy of it. You have to understand what it's made of. And that's where I failed you. Your father and I, we gave you everything we never had. A comfortable life, a college education, a safety net. We loved you so much, we forgot to teach you the most important thing of all, how to build something for yourself. We forgot to teach you what our work was worth. I turned to face him one last time. My son, lost and broken in the ruins of his own making. So consider this, I said, my voice clear and steady, my final lesson. I walked to the front door and opened it, letting the cool night air rush in. I didn't tell them to get out. I didn't have to. The conversation was over. Their future in this house was over. Everything was over. I just stood there, holding the door, waiting. I just stood there, holding the door, waiting. Chloe walked out first, her shoulders slumped, not even bothering to look at me. Then came Mark. He paused in the doorway, his back to me, for a long moment. I thought he might say something, one last angry word, but he just shook his head and walked out into the night, following his wife into the ruins of the future they had planned. I closed the door behind him. The click of the lock was the sound of a 40-year-old chapter of my life coming to an end. It was the sound of being, for the first time, completely and utterly on my own. It was the sound of freedom. 6 months passed. The silence that had initially filled my old house was replaced by the vibrant, humming energy of the city. I didn't move to Florida or take up knitting in a lovely facility. I sold my old house, just as I'd said, and used the money to buy a small, bright apartment downtown with a big window that looked out over a park instead of a manicured lawn. The space was new, filled with light, and held no ghosts. Everything in it was mine, chosen by me, for me. It was a Friday morning. The sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I wasn't at a 4 a.m. shift. I was sitting in a comfortable armchair, a tablet propped up on my lap, a cup of real tea, not the quick kind, from a bag steaming beside me. On the screen, Maria's smiling face was looking back at me, and the health inspector gave us a perfect score, she was saying, her voice buzzing with pride. He couldn't believe the new equipment. I told you he'd be impressed. I laughed. Did the new bakery delivery come in on time? Like clockwork, she said. Eleanor, you have to see this. She flipped the camera on her phone. The image was a little shaky, but what I saw made my heart swell. It was the diner, but it was reborn. The old sign was gone, replaced by a beautiful, hand-carved wooden one that read, "The Legacy Kitchen." Inside, the place was alive. The worn-out vinyl booths were gone, replaced by gleaming stainless steel workstations. The air was filled not with the smell of greasy bacon, but of fresh bread baking and spices I couldn't even name. But the most beautiful part was the people. A dozen young men and women, all under 20, moved with a focused energy. A young woman with bright purple hair was carefully piping frosting onto a cake, her tongue stuck out in concentration. A lanky young man was learning how to properly chop an onion from the new head chef, a respected caterer Maria had hired. They weren't just flipping burgers, they were learning a trade, a craft. They were building their own futures on the foundation Arthur and I had laid. "They're a good group of kids," Maria said, her voice soft over the happy clatter of the kitchen. "A little rough around the edges, some of them, but they're hungry. Not just for food, but for a chance. That's all your father ever wanted to give people," I whispered to myself. A fair chance. Maria's camera panned past the gleaming new ovens, past the students, and then it paused, focusing on the back of the kitchen, on the dishwashing station. My breath caught in my throat. Standing over the deep, industrial sink, surrounded by steam and stacks of soapy dishes, was Mark. He was different. Thinner. The expensive polo shirt and loafers were gone, replaced by a simple black t-shirt, a stained white apron, and non-slip kitchen shoes. His hair was shorter. The desperate, entitled gleam was gone from his eyes, replaced by a weary focus on the task at hand. He scrubbed a stubborn pot with a focused intensity I hadn't seen in him since he was a boy, trying to build a complex Lego set. He was just working. Honest, unglamorous, necessary work. "He showed up a month ago," Maria said quietly, so only I could hear. "Just walked in and asked if he could help, for free." I said no. I told him if he wanted to work, he'd get minimum wage and start at the bottom, just like everyone else. "He's got a long way to go, Eleanor." "But," she paused. "He hasn't been late once." As she spoke, Mark must have felt the camera on him. He looked up. His eyes, tired but clear, found the phone's lens. He saw Maria, and he must have known I was on the other end. For a second, our gazes locked through the screen, across the miles and the chasm that had opened between us. There was no anger in his eyes, no resentment. He just looked at me, and then he gave a short, small, respectful nod. It wasn't a son greeting his mother. It was an employee acknowledging the founder. It was a man acknowledging his lesson. Then he turned back to his sink full of dishes. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Maria flipped the camera back to her face, her expression full of a gentle understanding. We didn't need to say anything else about it. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, looking out my window at the city. I didn't feel the sharp sting of triumph I thought I might. I felt a quiet, peaceful sense of rightness. My son's journey was his own now. Maybe washing away the grime of other people's meals would help him wash away the entitlement that had tarnished his soul. Maybe starting at the bottom would finally teach him what it takes to build something that lasts. I didn't know, and for the first time, I understood that it wasn't my job to fix him. It was my job to live the life he had tried to take from me. And I was. Every single, beautiful, peaceful day. Looking out my window now, I see the city lights twinkling on, a constellation of a million other stories. My story doesn't have a storybook ending. There was no tearful reunion, no sudden realization from my son that brought everything back to the way it was, and for that, I am grateful, because the way it was broken. I learned that respect isn't something you can demand, it's something you command by respecting yourself first. I learned that a legacy isn't a dollar amount you leave behind in a will. It's the integrity you build every day in the way you live. My son is learning his own lesson now, one plate at a time. His journey is his own, and I have finally found the peace in letting it be. It's never too late to teach a hard lesson, and it's never, ever too late to rewrite your own story. My name is Eleanor, and I'm just getting started. So let me ask you, if life handed you a brand new, unwritten page, would you have the courage to turn to it? If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the hardest of times.